Yeah. Hey, wait a minute, said Jack, opening his eyes, straightening up and turning around. Purple? He didn't see Nate there. With the moonlight, Jack could see that the lever extended up from its slot in the rock without the snake wrapped around it. Jack heard from behind him Nate's "Just kidding!" right before he felt the now familiar piercing pain, this time in the other buttock. Jack sat on the edge of the dark stone in the rapidly cooling air, his feet extending out into the sand. He stared out into the darkness, listening to the wind stir the sand, occasionally rubbing his butt where he'd been recently bitten. Nate had left for a little while, had come back with a desert rodent-shaped bulge somewhere in his middle, and was now wrapped back around the lever, his tongue flicking out into the desert night's air, the only sign that he was still awake. Occasionally, Jack, with his toes absent-mindedly digging in the sand while he thought, would ask Nate a question without turning around. "Nate, do accidents count?" Nate lifted his head a little bit. "What do you mean, Jack?" Jack tilted his head back like he was looking at the stars. "You know, accidents. If I accidentally fall on the lever without meaning to, does that still wipe out humanity?" "Yeah, I'm pretty sure it does, Jack. I'd suggest you be careful about that if you start feeling wobbly," said Nate with some amusement. A little later, "Does it have to be me that pulls the lever?" asked Jack. "That's the rule, Jack. Nobody else can pull it," answered Nate. "No," Jack shook his head. "I meant, does it have to be my hand? Could I pull the lever with a rope tied around it, or push it with a stick, or throw a rock?" "Yes, those should work," replied Nate, "though I'm not sure how complicated you could get. Samuel thought about trying to build some kind of remote control for it once, but gave it up. Everything he'd build would be gone by the next sunrise if it was touching the stone or over it. I told him that in the past others that had been bound had tried to bury the lever so they wouldn't be tempted to pull it, but every time the stones or sand or whatever had disappeared." "Wow," said Jack. "Cool." Jack leaned back until only his elbows kept him off of the stone and looked up into the sky. "Nate, how long did Samuel live? One of his wishes was for health too, right?" asked Jack. "Yes," replied Nate. "It was. He lived 167 years, Jack." "Wow, 167 years. That's almost 140 more years I'll live if I live as long. Do you know what he died of, Nate?" "He died of getting tired of living, Jack," Nate said, sounding somewhat sad. Jack turned his head to look at Nate in the starlight. Nate looked back. Samuel knew he wasn't going to be able to stay in society. He figured that they'd eventually see him still alive and start questioning it, so he decided that he'd have to disappear after a while. He faked his death once, but changed his mind. He decided it was too early, and he could stay for a little longer. He wasn't very fond of mankind, but he liked the attention, most of the time anyway. His daughter and then his wife dying almost did him in, though. He didn't stay in society much longer after that. He eventually came out here to spend time talking to me and thinking about pulling the lever. A few months ago, he told me he'd had enough. It was his time." "And then he just died?" asked Jack. Nate shook his head a little. "He made his fourth request, Jack. There's only one thing you can ask for the fourth request, the last bite." After a bit, Nate continued. "He told me that he was tired, that it was his time. He reassured me that someone new would show up soon, like they always had." After another pause, Nate finished. Samuel's body disappeared off the stone with the sunrise. Jack lay back down and looked at the sky, leaving Nate alone with his memories. It was a long time until Jack's breathing evened out into sleep. Jack woke with the sunrise the next morning. He was a little chilled with the morning desert air, but overall was feeling pretty good. Well, except that his stomach was grumbling and he wasn't willing to eat raw desert rat. So after getting directions to town from Nate, making sure he knew how to get back, and reassuring Nate that he'd be back soon, Jack started the long walk back to town. With his new health and Nate's good directions, he made it back easily. Jack caught a bus back to the city and showed up for work the next day, little worse for the wear, and with a story about getting lost in the desert and walking back out. Within a couple of days, Jack had talked a friend with a tow truck into going back out into the desert with him to fetch the SUV. They found it after a couple of hours of searching and towed it back without incident. Jack was careful not to even look in the direction of Nate's liver, though their path back didn't come within sight of it.